And we are live with This Week in Mining, where we focus on making money in the mining and metals sector. My name is Jay Martin, and my host today is a currency specialist who helps people protect and grow their wealth with a hard asset strategy in a world of massively devaluing currency. Lynette, it's so good to have you back on the show and great to see you.
Oh, I'm very glad to be here, Jay. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. So lots to talk about. And I felt like the best way to open up this conversation would be to step back and say 2024 outlook, Lynette. Lots going on, right? I mean, most notably, the gold price is running after 2 years of investors wondering why it isn't. We were watching record central bank buying like over 1,000 tons per year, but the price wasn't responding. Everybody was curious as to why. Now it is. I don't know if you'd say those two things are directly correlated, but I want to start with your take, gold price, 2024 outlook, and then I'm just going to pull on some threads.
Okay. Well, let's see. Well, technically, I expect a little bit, and we're having that, a little bit of a pullback to fill a gap that was created, a gap up that was created. But it would not surprise me to see spot gold somewhere, even up to 3,000 by the end of this year would not surprise me at all. Still does not reflect its true fundamental value. But yeah, the breakout is in earnest, and that was suppressed for so long that this should have some legs to it.
I'm with you. Just a reminder to the audience, this is live. So if you guys have any questions for Lynette, please hit us up and we'll get to your questions. We had about 8 questions here submitted in advance. So thank you for those. I'm going to get to as many as I can. And then if you didn't submit in advance, just hit the live chat. I got my eyes on it, so I'll be watching that. Geopolitics events right now, Lynette, what's concerning you? What do you think is should be discounted in terms of making headlines? How much of your attention is trending towards geopolitics right now?
Well, there's a level that's trending toward geopolitics because this is really one of the things that you see 100% of the time when we're transitioning from one currency system to another currency system. And, I feel as if there are a lot of proxy wars that are happening, where even though it's Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Hamas, I feel like those are proxies for the rest of the world. So and these are the wars that we can see. Geopolitically, I think the more dangerous wars are actually happening in cyberspace that we can't see. But I feel that they need the visibility of the boots on the ground wars because that's what people see and they want that noticeable. So yeah, there's a lot that's going on in there, and I think that could definitely spread even further so that we have these global hotspots all over the world. Yeah, it's definitely something. And that justifies inflation. It justifies a lot. It justifies a lot.
What do you mean justifies? When you say justifies a lot, what exactly do you mean?
Well, after all, we have to create these, there's two types of debt. There is debt that repays itself, so self-liquidating debt. So you go out, you open a business, you borrow money to do it, but you're generating income and that pays the debt off. And then there's non-self-liquidating debt. And that's what governments do when they go to war. They build a bomb, they blow it up, and you're never going to recover that. And so that actually justifies the inflation that they call as sticky. And even when the war in Ukraine and Russia first started, then that was why food was going up. So that's what I mean by justifying a lot of different things that governments and central banks do. In the meantime, they're all buying gold hand over fist as much as they can get.
Yeah, so it's like a scapegoat tactic because when you look at the eruption of conflict in Europe, which is, 25% of the world's grain comes from Russia and the Ukraine. So it's like, it's very real. You could say this is exactly why food prices have gone up 5x. And don't worry about the printing press. It's completely unrelated.
Don't worry about this. This has nothing to do with why prices are going up. Nothing at all. Oh, I'm out of there. I can take another gun.
Yeah, right. Okay, so when you were talking about wars that you can't see, you were, you reminded me of Dr. Pippa Malmgren, who's been covering what she calls the hot war in cold places for, a handful of years, and this is satellite warfare and deep sea warfare, internet cable conflicts, legitimate conflicts in space between satellites and ships. Satellites being blown up to fill certain orbits with debris fields, so they're not accessible to other satellites. I mean, this is a real thing, but you're right. If it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. And a story in outer space with no footage, just some op-eds in the press isn't really enough to garner attention. But in today's world, obviously, I mean, maybe not obvious, but I think that's the far more consequential conflict,
Exactly.
because you can control communications, and that's everything.
Yeah, you could control energy, you can control the communications, and it's not visible until suddenly it's visible.
Yeah,
So you
right.
can't see it coming, and I think that's really where the most dangerous wars. I think that a lot of what's happening here is divide and conquer, right? So you can give somebody an enemy to point to and divide the population, when in reality, I believe so strongly that we need to come together, because we're not the enemies. It's the central bankers, it's the governments, it's the 1%ers that want to control everything. They're really the enemies, but they have to get us fighting each other, because it just makes it easier to do it.
Well, that is what you typically see during the sunset years of an empire. You mentioned that during your first answer there. You said, these wars are typical of what you see during those sunset years. And maybe, if you wouldn't mind, like, could you walk us through that cycle, that thesis a little bit? Because if you look at the fall of the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the British, you
The
look at
Roman,
today, what you see is like, hot wars, proxy wars, trade wars, left, right, and center. A lot of it's hard to make sense of, like, is that a unique territorial dispute, or is that something bigger and grander? So how do you interpret that cycle, and what are you seeing?
Jay, if you go back to every single currency and financial system shift, then there are these common elements. One is certainly wars. That is absolutely true. But you also see issues around energy. We have issues around energy. You have issues around civil rights. We have that. You have high inflation. You have issues around gender. Let's see, I might be forgetting some, but there are all of these typical patterns. And so while you're off paying attention to this, they're over here changing the whole system. But what they do on top of that is they try and keep things appearing to be as normal for you as possible, so that you don't realize that anything has changed. And then they give you like a bone, right? They let you earn extra money for a minute, so it looks like really, really good. And then all of a sudden you're inside of the system. You haven't really protected yourself, and there's no place else for you to go. So I'm seeing a lot of those patterns right now. But what about all of this sticky inflation, right? I mean, everybody raised rates. Didn't they tighten policy? No, they didn't really tighten. If you look at the from the Federal Reserve Education Department, the FRED, one of my very favorite websites, if you look at their chart and just in the search bar, just put financial conditions, it's really obvious that, I don't know anybody's surprised, financial conditions never really got very tight, even with the central bank selling off part of the portfolios that they grew since 2008. So that piece is a lie, and why they're surprised that the economies, and this is happening all over the place, why the economy and different economies' inflation continue to run hot. But what really is creating, I think, the danger in this really fragile global system is what's happening with the central banks and the decoupling of the central banks. And what I mean by that is, since 2008, they used forward guidance to let the markets know that they were what they were going to do so they could get into place, but they were working in a very synchronized way. It's not so synchronized anymore. And it isn't just the emerging markets to the advanced economies. You saw Switzerland decouple from the rest of the advanced economies by lowering their rates, right? Now, is the euro also going to lower the rates? When is the US going to lower their rates? None of this is going to help inflation get better because they just don't know how to stop doing this. They're at the end of the cycle. It's all that they really have. And what we've seen historically is that they lower rates to inspire people to borrow and spend, and they raise the rates when they want people to borrow less and spend less. But you get to a saturation point with this massive debt wall that we're already walking through. So many people think, so that's something that's going to happen. It might happen. It might not. No. It is happening. We just really are not able to see, like the stuff that's happening in cyberspace. We can't see what's happening with the derivative bomb, that debt bomb that's beneath the surface, that is controlled and determined whether or not there's a default by those that create this garbage. And I think that's a thing that makes me the most nervous, is how much danger is actually hidden so that it's hard to actually get into position, since so many people think, well, I'll be able to do that right before. It doesn't work like that.
Right. Now, as we move closer to this, derivative bomb event, that I think you're absolutely right. You can only kick the can so far. You can get creative. You can kick it a lot further than you think. But JP Morgan right now, for example, is sitting on $3 trillion in assets, 60 trillion in derivatives, just to put some perspective on.
Can we put a little more perspective on that, Jay? That is the nominal value of the derivatives, which means just the derivative contract value that the markets have agreed on.
Right.
But what we don't know, and they admit it, meaning the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the Federal Reserve, the FDA, everybody admits that none of that 60 trillion reflects the true value that's at risk, because they use all of this fancy accounting tactics to take that. If that's 60 trillion, you're probably honestly looking at more in the many quadrillions.
Yeah, the derivative market, as I understand, is like a 4 quadrillion. And it's kind of like, as I understand, it's obviously there's so many complexities buried within it by design that you cannot calculate what that number is intentionally, which is problematic. So as we move closer to maybe that event occurs, but on the path there, Lynette, to that fire, where will you look for smoke in terms of other currencies? Would you expect capitulation of other currencies first? And if so, which ones would be on that short list? There's a couple people in the audience asking about, what other currencies you've got your eyes on, and are there others where you would look for red flag signals?
Well, all of those things that we were talking about are all the red flag signals. Now, if we want to get currency specific, I think a great example is what's happening in Japan, because they just come full circle. Since we went into the new system back in the 70s and 80s, the yen to the dollar has come full circle. And, and look at all of the alphabet soup that Japan did to try and control their economy and their system, including buying up all of their stocks, or not all of them, but pretty darn close to all of them, and all of their bonds. So we're looking at manipulation at the highest order, and definitely the Japanese yen. And I'm also looking at the Swiss franc, right? But of course, any currency is relative to another currency. So if you're looking at, Argentina, for example, they think that the dollar is really strong, and it is relative to their peso. But it's losing value very rapidly. If, again, going back to the Fed, probably a little bit more honest than ever you're going to get coming out of their mouths, meaning central banks' mouths. There's, you just go in the search bar, put purchasing power of the consumer dollar, and you're going to see that it has been on a really rapid race to zero. And the only reason why it's not at zero now is probably funny accounting tricks, and the public still has confidence. But that is dwindling. And I'm very uncomfortable with seeing the decoupling of what were synchronized central banks to desynchronized central banks, because I think we'll see a lot more chaos and a lot bigger crisis. And I'm not convinced, and I have not ever been convinced, frankly, that they want to keep kicking the can down the road. They need to create a big enough crisis for us to accept the garbage that they want to shove down our throats, which is obviously the CBDC.
Okay, we had a few people submit questions about CBDCs. I want to get to those. And in addition, a bunch essentially asking, will there be a conflict in the future between gold and CBDCs? Maybe reflecting back on, the Roosevelt confiscation era, what tactics could be employed. And then I think in follow-up to that, what kind of physical is best to hold? And one question here that we'll get to, can Americans assume that silver and gold maples will be just as liquid as eagles? But a lot to unpack there, Lynette. Maybe I'll let you lead into that subject and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, desperate governments do desperate things. And there's covert confiscation, which especially people that are interested in mining and miners definitely know what that's about, that suppression. And then there's overt confiscation, where they say turn it in like Roosevelt did back in 33. And I would say without a doubt in my mind, they openly admit it. The central banks openly admit to manipulating the spot price. The spot price was created as a tool of manipulation to keep you and me, the public, away from gold, which is why it's not really surprising that it isn't just that the central banks have started accumulating a lot of gold. They went net positive in 2010, but they started shifting their stance and their policy on gold in 2005, before the great financial crisis, right? So they understand what's happening. Now, personally, I am not a bullion buyer, because in the US and in many other places in the world, they have a long history of gold confiscation. Maybe not in my lifetime, because I was born in 54, but certainly in my parents' lifetime. And when you look around the globe to say India in 2016, when they demonetized about 85% of their currency, they actually did go house to house, allowing Indian families to hold a certain level of gold, but taking also a certain level of gold. So personally, I believe that we will indeed see an overt confiscation again. For me, what I use as a guide is what I can hold and cannot hold inside of an IRA, because for Americans, that's where most people that hold gold and silver, that's where they hold it. So for them to do a big sweep of IRAs, it's easy peasy, because eminent domain laws say that they can really take anything that they want. They just have to pay you market value. And if they're manipulating the price, then they're the ones that are determining the current market value of the gold. And they're going to want easy cooperation. They don't want you to know that they're doing it. The covert ways that they've been doing it is through taxation, through manipulation of the spot market. Look at the purchasing power. Pick the day you were born and see what it's done since then. Inflation and eliminating your ability to protect yourself from inflation with real money is also a form of confiscation. As minors, you know that they'll put all sorts of levies and special taxes and rights and this and that. So there's all different ways to confiscate. But if they do the overt confiscation, which is, in my opinion, probable. I mean, I was there, and in my uncle's back bedroom, when he opened two tall floor safes and had at least 3,000 ounces of gold in there when it was illegal to hold more than 5 ounces. Oh, he did? Well, what kind of gold could he have legally that he could use in the normal marketplace? Pre-33 raw gold coins. That's what he had in there. And he couldn't fit one more in because he was an antique dealer. So he'd go to high net worth homes and buy stuff. And then they'd be, we have these old coins. And he was probably buying them at $35 an ounce, or maybe he paid a little bit of a premium. So personally, when you're talking to me about eagles or Canadian maple leafs or pandas or any other new gold, that is all classified as bullion. So I don't buy that. And I feel differently about silver, but let's just stay with gold. Rather, I like the foreign gold coins. This happens to be a French rooster. And this, which is a pre-33 double eagle, American double eagle, but it's slabbed. See this nice hard plastic tamper-proof case. That puts it into a different category. All of them have, well, not all gold coins have the same gold content, but the current eagles, as well as the pre-33 eagles, they're all 22 carats. So they have the same gold content. And I mean, this is just a raw gold coin, right? I can't hold this in my IRA. Why not? Right? It's in a collectible category. That's what I want to own. Because the people that own things like that are slabbed, I'm not talking about the raw now, I'm talking about the more rare collectibles. When you look at some of these coins, they're paying like $15 million or $8 million for 1 ounce of gold. They're not going to turn it in at face value or even at a premium to spot. They're not going to turn it in. But beyond that, anybody that can afford to spend $8 million on 1 ounce of gold is very likely to be the person that writes the laws, or, as we see over and over and over again, influence those that write the laws. So that's the category that I want to be in, because I always ask myself, what if I'm right and what if I'm wrong? Well, if I can do something that really doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong, then that's what I'm going to do. Or even if you are a very big believer in bullion, then you use this to diversify your portfolio in case you're wrong. So there are different strategies, and especially with minors, there are different strategies that you can employ that make it not matter whether you're right or wrong. And that's in this environment, frankly, that's the position I like to be in. Doesn't matter.
So, okay, so a couple threads I want to pull on there, and one or two questions here in the chat as you were speaking. In that scenario, I guess your assumption is that there would not be an accessible market for maples, eagles, pandas. Is that part of the issue, Lynette, that if you're acquiring physical, but it's in government issued or minted or approved physical, like new, just use the word new. Yeah. Finding a market for that will be a challenge for the average Joe or Jane.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Now a question here about,
if there was an overt confiscation.
If there was an overt confiscation. You know, and I kind of feel like, yeah, so there's one question here about, what about paper contracts on gold? Would those be more secure? Because physical would be, you might have the same reaction that I had, but I do appreciate the question. I think it's an important one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that obviously, I think the physical will be a lot harder to confiscate because I can hide it anywhere. I mean, that's why I buy physical. It's beside the 4 passports and the handgun and the safe in the backyard. Like, you know, maybe not, but you know, when it comes to digital assets, you know, the concept of a bank bail-in is very real in the sense that if you have assets in a bank or a brokerage house, you know, as in Canada and the US, depositor funds can be used to bail a bank out of their own insolvency. That's my cash, that's your cash.
Mhm.
And that's the, you know, vulnerable aspect to deposits in general. What's your take on paper contracts on gold, Lynette, from a security standpoint? Did you just rip up a dollar bill?
That's my opinion on that. Because the reality is if you don't hold it, you don't own it, regardless of what your perception is, it does not hold true in a court of law. And it is just a paper contract that all you can do is convert it into these things. That's why I tore them up. Because when these things have absolutely zero value and nobody wants them, you could have quadrillions of them.
Mm.
And a quadrillion times zero is still zero. So
So-
no, it's not a paper contract person. That's for trading. Because you think that you want to take advantage of the price moves. And that is not what you use this for sure. So
Yeah.
it has a place, but not in a protection portfolio. No.
So I want to use this as a framework to describe the entry point for a CBDC.
Mhm.
And let's lead into that one next. I'll pass it over to you, Lynette, to explain that concept.
Well, first of all, everybody's got in the US, they've got a FedNow account, right? So because they complained how hard it was to send everybody checks during the pandemic, it'd be so much easier if they could just push a button and just make this deposit into their accounts. So we need a really big, or I should say, they need, central bankers need a really big crisis that will scare the crap out of people and say, save me, save me. Then they deposit all of these CBDCs in this country into the FedNow accounts, say, go spending, you don't have to worry about it, we're taking care of you. The real question is not going to be, you know, how can they get the CBDCs into our hands because a crisis will usher that in? The question is, will people then make the choice to deposit new earned money into the CBDC or new money into the CBDC? That's the challenge that many countries has been happening, and I'm hoping that that is indeed what will happen again, because I'm working hard on building a global community so that we can say no. So yeah, it'll be a huge crisis. That's why, you know, kicking the can down the road, only till they're ready for the music to stop.
Do you see, like, when, as you explain overt confiscation, and as I think through the legal recourse that banks and institutions have on our deposits that they can confiscate,
Well, yeah.
can leverage, we know they can leverage. And as I understand a bank bail-in concept, they can confiscate if in need to bail themselves out of an insolvency. They can take my cash to do so. I have no legal recourse in that scenario, which sounds crazy. And obviously, if a bank were to do this, it would lead to the, you know, the collapse of the bank, because nobody would ever deposit cash there ever again. So it's, you know, it'd take a sort of end of days scenario for that to actually occur. But, you know, that end of days scenario, is that the entry point of the CBDC? That's the pivot point, that we're not going to confiscate, we're going to convert. And we're not taking your assets. It's just, you know, it's kind of like, in a sense, the Roosevelt confiscation, that you hit the papers one day asking people to deposit their gold in exchange for on par US dollars. And then immediately after, you revalue gold, and people find out after the fact they've been caught in a Kansas City shuffle. They look left and you go right. Similar scenario. Is that how you'd envision this?
Very similar scenario. This will save us, but it won't. It'll just enslave us. Yeah.
Right. Okay. What's your solution? Let's get to the good news. What are you doing to prepare? How
So
are you insulated?
this is, you know, as you know, I have a new channel, the Lynette Zang and LynetteZang.com. And here is a very simple solution, and it is a very quiet revolution buy gold and silver. There you go. If enough people start to hold physical gold and silver and convert into that and take their money out of products that are in this garbage, then guess what? If enough happen, maybe 3%, maybe 5%, if enough people do that, we have a shot, I believe, we have a shot at being at the seat of the table as we are actually creating the new financial system and the new money. Now, one place that I find extremely fascinating, and I'm watching it like a hawk for this test, is Zimbabwe, right?
Okay.
Zimbabwe, that's been experiencing hyperinflation since 2006 and has now the 6th new currency that they put in place. And what, it was maybe a year and a half ago, I could be off on dates a little bit, but it was about a year and a half ago that they issued a Zimbabwe gold coin so that people could maintain their purchasing power. Well, who could afford that? Just the wealthy, just those 1%ers. So then they came out with a gold-backed CBDC for the masses, but it didn't get adopted so well. Huh, shocking. Why? Because public has lost all trust in the money, in the government, and you cannot convert it into this. So is it really there? Who knows? Now they just recently came out with a ZIG, a new Zimbabwe dollar, that is a combination of a basket of currencies and a component of gold and other precious metals. I haven't yet been able to find the breakdown of that, but again, nobody's adopting it. Good God, some government agencies aren't even accepting them. What? Here the government issues a new currency and their own arms of their agencies won't accept them, but they think the public will. The public doesn't trust it. So at some point, and I'm just watching to see what they're doing because this is how they do it. So it's a great real-time example of what it's going to look like. Zimbabwe was in crisis, right? Hyperinflation of what, 5,000%, 5 billion%, something like that. I mean, you have it today. It's like there's the Simpsons. Actually, I love this. The Simpsons had a cartoon, and one of the characters had been given a check from his mom, and he took it or his grandma, and he took it to the bank and deposited. And he goes, and the bank guy is going, "Oh, well, we can do this," and oh, it's gone. Well, that's probably how they felt in Zimbabwe, right? So, but it's not working. And so ultimately, what they may do, we'll see, is actually have it convertible. And my personal opinion is that this is not going to be over. And I want everybody to realize this. Just because they say that it's backed by gold doesn't mean anything until you can hold their toes to the fire by converting whatever it is, the CBDC or the currency or whatever, into gold and have a level of control over government spending and government control. That's the battle. And we need to have a revolution that we take our power back. But hopefully it can be a peaceful revolution just by buying physical gold and silver.
Right. Right. It's amazing how adaptable people can be to just, I don't know, currency atrocities. Like I've got a buddy in Buenos Aires, he's a money manager. So he's trying to manage money in, 12% monthly inflation. Like,
how do you do that?
Yeah, exactly. How do you do that? No, that's like he's a magician. And just the strategies that people employ when they get their paycheck, for example, right? Like no one's holding Argentinian pesos, obviously. I mean, we lose our minds over 9% annual. They're living through 10 to 13% monthly. Hard to wrap your mind around that, but it's not that far away. And it's not the first time. Any take on
control?
Once again, please.
Well, once it's out of control, it's out of control. Once that public confidence is lost,
Mm.
And Jay, that's a concern that I have, because I think one of the times that we spoke, I said, what I'm watching is the monetary velocity chart, how quickly money is changing hands, because it changes hands very rapidly in a hyper or high inflation environment because people don't want to hold on to it. They see prices going up, 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 up. And, you know, the monetary velocity, the M2, so the M2 money supply has been declining quite rapidly since 97. Couple little blips up, but boy, Tankarooski, worse than it was back in 33 in the US. And yet recently it has been spiking in a very, very definitive way. So I believe, I'm sorry, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, but maybe I am. But I believe that the hyperinflation has already begun. And that's why all of these global central bankers are saying, why is this inflation so sticky? Why is this inflation so sticky? Because I think we've already begun that. So you got to get ready as soon as possible. Quite honestly, I think we're running out of time.
How much of the incentive for the US to be involved in so many foreign conflicts is to prop up these scapegoats of inflation, Lynette?
Couldn't tell you, but I'd say a lot.
A
I
lot.
feel the US has the most to lose, but you know, even with the US most to lose, there was a recent Bank for International Settlements report when we're talking about CBDCs. The US was right there at the forefront until Silicon Valley Bank, the whole regional banking crisis that happened roughly a year ago. And then we kind of pulled back, and then also with FTX and that explosion. And the Federal Reserve, I mean, I don't know whether this is arrogance, stupidity. I'm not really sure what this is. But in a recent Federal Reserve report on the position of the dollar as the world reserve currency, even though we've been watching its dominance decline over time, and we know that by using the SWIFT system, so that's the global dollar payment system, against Russia, against our enemies, everybody was watching and go, wow, if we don't do what the US wants us to do, they can cut us out of the global financial system. So between that, what we also are seeing happen is a brand new, because the SWIFT and money market funds, that's the global plumbing for the global financial system. They're building another digital plumbing system to not only rival that, but to take that away. Once that new digital system is put in place, how easy would it then be to turn off this current system and turn on the new system? And it can happen just that fast. I don't think people can maintain it.
What about small business entrepreneurs, Lynette, who, you know, it's one thing to diversify your personal net worth as you should, pull it away from any counterparty risk, hold the asset, you know, that is nobody else's liability, right? That's the value of owning physical metal. But there's only so far you can detach, especially if you're a business owner, right?
Yep.
You've got to run. I mean, I got 3 kids and 2 businesses. Like, I am a cash business, right?
Yep.
I am a cash person. So what would your counsel be to anybody who's, to entrepreneurs and who are looking at their business vulnerability? And that's what happens to the net asset value of my company in this scenario.
Well, what you do is you properly diversify. So like, you know, I've been studying currency life cycle since 1987, and we just see these repeatable patterns. So what you do is you use the physical at the fundamental value, not the spot market value, because that is not really revealing the truth. And I'm never going to count on Wall Street to give me real price discovery. When you're going to see that is when they do those revaluations and take something that has no intrinsic value and puts it into something, or revalues it against something that is all intrinsic value because it's used everywhere. So as a business owner, you look at your sources of income and your sources, your costs, and your inventory and all of that. And then you simply diversify that with layers of protection that you just put aside. And in that way, you can continue to pay your staff, you can continue to pay your bills, and you can continue to stay in business. But if you don't diversify it, if you're counting on those Canadian dollars or US dollars or Japanese yen or whatever it is, the government money, then when that goes away, so do you. And we can already see that, that division between the haves and the have-nots, and that K-shaped recovery they were talking about, and that income and wealth inequality that they were talking about. They have almost wiped out that middle, that mom and pop that is really the backbone of jobs and everything else in our government, or in our economy. But for the entrepreneur, you got to think fast on your feet, and you have an easier opportunity to take some of the capital that you are generating right now and convert it into physical that you just put back to make sure that you can always pay salaries. That's what I've done. I like the raw coins pre-33 because you can't hold them in an IRA, so they're much less likely to get confiscated. This is what I personally use for that occurrence to replace income. Depends on your business. But you sit down, you look at your business, you look at your income, you look at your cost, you look at what you need, you look at your debts, you take a look at all of that, and then you build a protection portfolio in the emergency, that when you need it, there it is.
Right.
And
Okay.
not only can you then live to fight another day, but dare I say it, you have the opportunity to expand your business.
I like it. All right. So the Lynette Zang on YouTube, or LynetteZang.com for more of your content and services. And Lynette, what can people find there real quick if they hit LynetteZang.com?
Well, right now what they will find is a countdown clock to the day, which is on the 14th, the 14th of May. We will be open for business.
Oh yeah.
YouTube channel. I know I'm so excited. This is great. I feel free. I feel like I can do what I know is the right thing to do for our viewers, because we really are here to be of service, and we really want to just make a positive difference for a lot of people and help people build a local community so that they can get their food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. And then also the global community, so that we can come together in this peaceful revolution and have the ability to say no and to have our voices heard. So that's what we're doing there. We're helping meet people wherever they are and help them get into position to not just weather this storm, but to actually thrive through it. What a concept.
I love that. I love that. And for everybody who tuned in today, thank you for stopping by, hitting the live chat. We're here every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern. Next week, I'll be on with our good friend, Peter Schiff, who's always exciting. And he'll be here to answer your questions, my questions, anybody's questions. So make sure to be here next Wednesday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Hit the live chat. Until next week, thanks so much. Bye-bye.